Hey guys, Merry Christmas to everyone who celebrates Christmas. Happy holidays to pretty much everyone else, but today is December 25th, so for everyone who celebrates Christmas, you're currently ripping away your wrapping paper and basically unboxing gifts. Woohoo! I had a comment from someone on one of our recent videos. I'm sorry, I forget who it was. I didn't jot down the name. Who said, why don't you do something sort of like my Saturn Memories video for the Nintendo 64's 20th. It's 20th anniversary. I was going to say 25th, but no, it was, I think it was September 26, 1996 that the platform launched in Japan. And while it's not September, it's Christmas Day, I thought it would be cool to just reminisce. So like sit back here, yes, put my feet up, yeah, and reminisce about the Nintendo 64, some of my favorite moments or memories with it. And then maybe you can share some of your favorite memories or moments. So yeah, why don't we talk? So basically, like many other people out there, I picked up a Nintendo 64 when it was brand new, when it had just come out. Super Mario 64 was a big deal. Everyone that I knew was really excited for this. You got to remember that at this point in time, Sega had pretty much just killed itself, right? So the company said, okay, that's it. We're not going to release any more hardware revisions or, well, not really hardware revisions, but no more games for our hardware. Because at that point in time, in 1995, well, just before 1995, Sega was supporting the Sega Master System, the Sega Genesis, the Game Gear, the Sega CD, and the 32X, and now we have the Sega Saturn. 6 platforms they were releasing games for at the exact same time, which is totally crazy. But in 1995, they pulled the plug on everything. They were like, okay, it doesn't matter. Even though the Genesis was still very successful, they said, up yours, and we're just going to focus on Saturn from here on out. So by the time the Saturn came out, it was already looking like, oh boy, this isn't really good, what's happening right now. I don't want to say they were counted out, but they were already sort of like, oof. Nintendo, on the other hand, we had heard a lot of rumblings about this CD attachment for the Super Nintendo. You guys know all about the CDI, you know about the prototype with PlayStation, you know about all of that jazz. But back in the day, we had just heard that there was going to be this sort of attachment for the Sega CD, and it never came to fruition. So it never actually happened. Well, okay, that's fine. What does that mean? Well, it means that Nintendo really didn't make any mistakes up until that particular point in time. But they were about to. They were about to make a huge mistake. But, hindsight, well, basically, I was going to say a saying, but screw it. I was going to say, everyone basically, we look at it back now and we all realize, oh yes, of course, they should have done this, they should have done that. But really, there was no successful CD platform in North America at that particular point in time when the Sega CD was out and all these rumors about the Super Nintendo CD attachment, and yes, of course, there was a TurboGrafx attachment, but nobody bothered with that platform in North America whatsoever. So where does that leave Nintendo? Well, it leaves Nintendo basically in an interesting spot. For people like me, we were really excited because it looked like, well, our Genesis was now finished because Sega just totally killed it off and they're focusing on the Saturn, but the Saturn had all kinds of problems going on. Then you had this newcomer, Sony, who, there were a lot of us that were like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool, but we don't know who they are. So yeah, they had, some cool titles, and I've already gone and done many videos about things like Tomb Raider, which of course was on Saturn first, but Resident Evil, games like that, like they were starting to cater towards a more mature audience, and I was one of those people. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool, right? But growing up, all of my favorite franchises, or at least the bulk of my favorite franchises, were on Nintendo-made platforms, the NES and the Super NES. And so, naturally, I was excited about the N64. And when Super Mario 64 was being shown, I'll never forget, it was called Ultra 64. The Nintendo Ultra 64 had this cool little like a logo. It looked almost like a CD logo type of thing. And then they just sort of scrapped that and went with Nintendo 64, and I hated that. I absolutely hated the name Nintendo 64. I love the name Nintendo Ultra 64 because Super Nintendo I thought was a cool name, so now it's the Ultra Nintendo. And we had seen a whole bunch of tech demos and all kinds of stuff. It looked really good. There was a tech demo even using the Final Fantasy VI characters, showing what theoretically a Final Fantasy could look like on the Nintendo 64, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And so I was really excited for the Nintendo 64 when it was coming out. I was super stoked, and I remember going down to Toys R Us, picking it up. I still have all my original launch model N64, my Super Mario 64, Shadows of the Empire, which I thought was really, really cool. But it was when those games were completed that I started to see problems. And you got to understand that it's because I was playing on the Saturn and I was playing on the PlayStation why I started to see problems. Because I realized that I think Nintendo made a big mistake with going with cartridges. And that's what I was saying back then. Obviously, hindsight's 2020, right? Looking back now, no duh. And I'm sure even to a lot of developers back then, they were saying the same thing. Alright, sorry about that. I had to close it. There was a phone call, as you guys obviously heard. So anyways, I realized that, going with cartridges, that probably wasn't a smart thing to do. And now, obviously, we all say that, like, yeah, no kidding. But even back then, it's because there were a lot of different full-motion video games. And I'm not talking about Sega CD stuff. I'm saying things like Resident Evil that incorporated full-motion video that I was like, this is kind of cool, like, this is kind of awesome. And more games started getting released for other platforms, and I was getting really kind of like, oh man, like, where are all our games? And now, you gotta understand, there were tons of games on the N64. There were some really amazing games on the N64. Jeez, Rare, like, basically exploded on that platform. It was unbelievable, from the Banjo-Kazooies to Donkey Kong. Although I didn't like Donkey Kong 64. Sorry. I just thought it was, like, overboard with collecting crap. And I was starting to get jaded. This was the console generation where I truly started to get jaded, where I really started to move away from, the bulk of my time being spent on Nintendo platforms, because number one, Sony was putting out way more games that catered to different tastes. Then when Square Enix jumped ship and started releasing all kinds of games on Sony's platform, well, then that was it. Like, I was playing crazy amounts of games on the PlayStation. And again, this goes without even talking about the Saturn. With the Saturn, it had dried up significantly by the late 1996, mid 1997 sort of time period. So I sort of swapped my time from Saturn onto the N64. Now, it was funny because I started really getting jaded a lot. Thought Mario 64 was incredible. I actually really liked the controller. When they introduced Star Fox with the rumble feature, I was like, this is cool, but like, whoa, baby. And then it was shortly after that when Sony came out with the DualShock controller, and I was like, oh man, this is like so much better because it's all incorporated in, and I thought of right away 2 analog sticks. Oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. You can move the camera around and stuff. And when it eventually got there, I was like, this is wicked. So it's sort of like a dark period for me, the N64 days. Because on one hand, I had some amazing time with that platform. The first Smash Brothers being released on N64 was awesome. Now, there's one game in particular I haven't mentioned. And that's because that was the game I was holding out hope for. You got to also remember that 96 into 97, there were all the rumors, and not even rumors, but like Nintendo came out and specifically said, we're making this zip drive attachment, the disk drive, for the Nintendo 64, the DD, or the double D, baby, add-on to it. And I was like, this is never going to get released here. Because there were so many cool add-ons that were released for the Super Nintendo, the Satellaview, even for the Famicom. You know, you had the Famicom disk system. We didn't get any of that. So I was very skeptical that we would ever get the disk drive, and lo and behold, we never actually got it. But there was the one game that was constantly being mentioned with the disk drive was Zelda. And Zelda was the one that I was like, man, I can't wait to see A Link to the Past in 3D. Now, again, you have to put yourself back in 1996-7 time frame. The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past had already been out for a few years now. We were disappointed, and people like me, we were really disappointed that it did not get a sequel on the Super Nintendo. Instead, they focused on Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, and while I loved it, I thought it was a brilliant game, it wasn't A Link to the Past. Like, A Link to the Past is one of those games where you could say, you know, it changed my life. Like, it was an incredible game. And so I wanted a follow-up to that so badly. And when we finally started, in 97, finally started to see what would become The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, I was so stoked, man. I was so excited. And going into 98, I was like, this is going to be the best year ever. And I don't know if it's ever been surpassed. I really don't know. Final Fantasy VIII was in development, would come out in 1999, but we were seeing a lot of it. You had Metal Gear Solid's release date. That was like the big game on PlayStation. And you had Panzer Dragoon Saga and Shining Force 3 on the Saturn. What, like, wow, baby! But it was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time that year that just blew me away. And again, remember, I'm spending a lot of time on the PlayStation at this point in time. 97, when Symphony of the Night came out, I was like, man, this is sick. I think it was 97, 96, 97, something like that. I was spending so much time in Sony's camp, where, like, especially when Final Fantasy VII hit. Oh man, look out! Like, that was crazy how much time I spent with that game. Then Gran Turismo and all these sorts of games. But when A Link to the Past came out, I spent so much time. I remember I had a physics exam, and I bombed that physics exam. I think I got like 18%, because all I did was I played A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, from the moment I got it until, like, I don't know, 2 days later or something. I didn't put it down. I essentially beat that game in like two playthrough sessions. It was unbelievable. And to this day, it's one of the greatest moments I've ever had with a Zelda game. It's just absolutely amazing. It lived up to all my lofty expectations. And it was, to me, a worthy successor to A Link to the Past, even though it was actually very similar to A Link to the Past. And then from that point forward is where I really pulled away from the Nintendo 64. There were a lot of other releases that came out. We did get Majora's Mask, but I didn't enjoy it as much as Ocarina of Time. And it's a really good game. It's a really fun game. But I was so jaded by that particular point in time that I think even the mighty Zelda, like, I just stopped caring so much about Nintendo. I was furious of what had happened with Sega, but I was really, you know, I was looking forward to Dreamcast in 1999. Sony, when they went crazy with the amount of games they were releasing. When Final Fantasy VIII came out, I was like, oh my god, this is like amazing compared to Final Fantasy VII in terms of the graphics, the audiovisual presentation, gameplay and stuff, oh boy. But whatever. And it just seemed that for every one good Nintendo 64 game that came out, 15 great PlayStation 1 games came out. And of course, that's not reality, it's not exactly what happened, but it's the way I viewed it. And even GoldenEye and all those games, as awesome as they were, and they were fun, man. Having friends come over with a system that had 4 controllers just built right in was flippin' awesome. The analog stick, the rumble feature, although the rumble feature I never liked because it made the controller heavy, but the analog stick, man, I mean, it changed the whole industry. But it's funny because when people ask me about my memories with the Nintendo 64, there's essentially 2 games. There's Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Even your GoldenEyes, your Star Foxes, Donkey Kongs, all the rare classics, your Banjos, Jet Force Gemini, I enjoyed all of them. Played through all of them. Perfect Dark, love that guitar riff at the end in the credits. I still listen to that on YouTube from now and every now and then. But it's what I remember most is my falling out with Nintendo at that particular point in time. More so than anything else, more so than any of the games or anything. And it's funny because it's now 20 years old, and I look back now and I'm like, my goodness, for 20 years now, I've basically been this cynical SOB. I'm still a very big fan of Nintendo. I just finished Pokemon Sun, and Steven and I have our Nintendo Fanboys podcast. But the truth is, that was the turning point. It was during the N64's time when I started to pull away from Nintendo and realized, you know what, this isn't going to be the #1 platform where I spend all my time. And that was the beginning of the end for Nintendo, both as a gaming company and as a gaming company to me. I mean, they would rebound with the Wii, but look at where they are right now with the Wii U, and we don't know what's going to happen with Switch and so on and so forth. But yeah, that was the point where I stopped playing games on Nintendo's platform as my primary console, was during the N64 era. And then for GameCube, it would be my #2 platform until Halo came out. And then it would actually drop down to #3, believe it or not, because there were some great games on Xbox. You had Knights of the Old Republic, you had Halo, of course, and so on and so forth. But Sony would be my dedicated go-to platform pretty much for the remainder of my gaming time up to right now. So that's pretty much some of my memories from the N64. I know it's a little bit depressing of sorts now that I think about it, but I will never forget my time I spent with that little machine. And now I'd like to hear from you guys. What are some of your favorite memories? Were any of you similar to me, where you were really super excited, got your hands on it, loved it, but that call or that allure of those more mature games slowly started to pull you towards the competition? So let me know. Leave a description. Leave a description below. Yeah, leave a comment in the comment section below the description. And like I said, once again, if you're celebrating Christmas today, Merry Christmas, everybody. For everyone else, Happy Holidays. And I believe that's going to be it for now. So we have lots of content coming up for you guys in the next couple of days, weeks, and months, as usual. Thank you all for your support, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.